Welcome to Survival of the Fittest Real Life. Outwit, outplay, outlast. Just like the show Survivor, all creatures on Earth are fighting to survive, but only the fittest can actually survive in nature. We are going to talk about diversity in animals and how they are adapted to best survive in the wild. Let's start our discussion with a guy named Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a naturalist, meaning he was a guy who was curious about and studied nature. He went to a place called the Galapagos Islands, right off the coast of South America, to study animals, and he found that species change over time depending on their environments. So let's look at the proof that Darwin observed. What did he collect from these different islands? He actually collected birds, many species of birds. What did he discover about these animals back in England? Well, once he got them back to England, he discovered they weren't all these different species of birds. They were all finches, and that all these different birds must have developed from one core species. All these birds that look so different here were actually different birds of the same species. Pooh! Mind blown. The main feature that was different in these birds were their beaks. So they all had pretty much the same basic structure, with just the beaks being different. Years after Darwin's discovery, he realized the reason for these differences must have been the beak types were related to the birds' diets. So depending on what food was available, their beaks changed over time to fit the needs of their diets. So a new vocab word we need to talk about is artificial selection first. Artificial selection is when humans select plants or animals for breeding based on desired traits. So it's kind of not really survival of the fittest, but survival of what we want them to survive. Let me give you an example. Why would we do this? We do this to get only the traits we want in the organisms around us. The best example are dogs. How many of you have a dog or even have a cat? Well, let me give you an example of dogs. So here is a lab, a beautiful golden lab. Golden lab falls in love with a poodle. Does anybody know when we get a mommy poodle and a daddy lab? Labradoodles. We breed in the traits that we want in our dogs. Labradoodles are very desirable because labs are very family-friendly dogs, and then you have poodles that don't shed. So now you have these adorable little Labradoodles that are very good with kids. They're playful, but they don't shed. Well, when this happens in nature, when nature selects the best traits for survival, it's called natural selection. When organisms inherit advantageous traits to reproduce more successfully than other organisms. To help you out with some of the vocabulary, a variation is a natural difference in traits. Kind of like those birds' beaks. A mutation is a change in genetic material. We usually tend to think of mutations as being bad, but mutations can actually be a good thing sometimes in nature. Mutations mean more variation, which means more diversity, so the ability to adapt to environmental change is much greater. I'm going to give you an example with a jaguar. Some jaguars mutated. Their jaw sizes were way bigger than other jaguars. We're going to talk a little bit more about why these jaguars' jaw sizes were varied in a minute. But first, it's time for your animal carnage clip of a jaguar versus a crocodile. Who do you think will win? Let's find out. Whoa, did you think the jaguar was going to take down that crocodile? All right, so what is an adaptation? An adaptation is an inherited trait that helps an organism survive and reproduce in an environment. It's basically a helpful mutation. In that jaguar example, the mutation that proved to be a beneficial adaptation is a larger jaw size. The larger jaw size helped the jaguar eat more variety of prey. I mean, come on, it took down a huge crocodile. When the mutated jaguars were finding out that they had this advantageous extra jaw size, it helped them survive. Not only could they eat crocodiles when times were rough and they couldn't get their usual prey, but they could also do things like break open the shells of turtles, and they could get their mouth around other prey. So because of this, the larger jaw size started to become the more common trait because it helped them survive. It was a beneficial mutation, which is now an adaptation. Also, something to keep in mind, adaptations can be physical, like a mouth size or a physical body structure, or an adaptation could be behavioral, so the way an organism behaves, something it does. So adaptations can be something an animal does or something an animal has on its body. That's something very important to keep in mind. Speaking of adaptations, I have a good way to help you memorize it with this sweet music video featuring a camel.
Traction than a Jeep and another on my chest so I can rest on the sizzling sands that ride like a pan. I'm crossing the Sahara in my caravan. I'm the legendary dromedary, 400 pounds on my back in the desert I carry. Nothing to drink until the next oasis. Water is precious so we never waste it. Adaptation, changes in the body to fit a location. Changes in the body to fit a location. Not a drop of rain, it's never extra dry, but I never get a grain of sand in my eye. If the wind blows gyros, sand tornadoes, I got better lids kid than J-Lo. Long and thick with a double lash, close them fast, built to last. In the hump on my back, got an extra tank, like a savings bank, packed with fat. The hump on my back is packed with fat. The hump on my back is packed with fat. The hump on my back is packed with fat. Won't say it again, cause you know all that. Thick lips, eat sticks and bone, thorny scrubs that others leave alone. Sometimes sip for the salty brine, cause the H2O is hard to find. My shaggy fur insulates, my body temps regulate, so I don't sweat and dehydrate. Live another day to procreate. Adaptation, changes in the body to fit a location. Adaptation, changes in the body to fit a location. Adaptation, changes in the body to fit a location. Adaptation, changes in the body to fit a location.
All right, you know you loved it. It was amazing. However, the message you need to get out of it is that adaptation changes in a body to fit a location. So the song had a very important message about what this whole section of the unit is about. How animals have changed over time to be able to survive in the different environments that we've talked about, those different biomes that we've been studying. How do animals and plants and organisms survive there? What is so special about them? Let's talk a little bit more about how species change over time. Now remember, this takes a long period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes generations. Over generations, the adaptations, which are the good mutations, become more common. Like our friend the jaguar. The jaguars with the large jaws became more and more common because more of the large-jawed jaguars were able to survive and reproduce. The parents and offspring often have little differences in their genetic material, and over many generations these small differences can add up. Another example is bacteria. All of us have been sick before with like maybe strep throat or an ear infection. Those things are caused by bacteria. So some of them have changed to resist penicillin, which is the most common antibiotic. This graphic will show you. So here's an example of a type of bacteria called H. pylori. When antibiotic is applied, the bacteria dies. However, if there is a mutant that has adapted to survive the antibiotic, it's going to be able to continue to reproduce and make more offspring that are also resistant to antibiotics. So organisms can change over time and adapt. Okay, so as we've been talking, adaptations generally help an organism to survive. Adaptations are advantageous changes in an organism to help something survive in its environment. If an environment changes, a species is more likely to survive if it has genetic variation. For example, our jaguars we keep talking about. The jaguars that have larger jaws are going to be able to keep the species going in times of food shortage. Bigger jaws mean more varieties of prey. You can eat a crocodile if you have big jaws. You can break open the shell of a tortoise if you have big jaws. Small-jawed jaguars cannot do that and are less likely to survive in times of trouble. However, if a species can't adapt, especially can't adapt quickly enough, a species can become extinct. Extinction is when all members of a species have died. That means there are no more. What animal or creature do you think of most when you hear the word extinction? I'll bet you thought dinosaurs. Dinosaurs went extinct for several different theories. The most accepted is the fact that there was a meteor that hit the Earth and changed the condition, changed the habitat too quickly for them to adapt. Other examples that cause extinction are greater competition, new predators, loss of habitat, or a natural disaster like that meteor I was telling you about with the dinosaurs. Let's talk a little bit about fossils. We're going to talk a lot more about fossils later, but here's just a snapshot. Fossils. Fossils are remains or imprints of once living organisms. Fossils prove to us the order of which species have existed and how organisms have changed over time. When we find the remains and we find the fossils, we can see the changes. When you look at this picture over here, we see an animal that has changed over time. We can see many similarities in the fossils, but some subtle differences as we go through geologic time. So what started out as being this land mammal ended up, these are the bones of a killer whale. It is thought that at one time whales were actually land mammals and then adapted over time to survive better in the water. Well, basically, let's wrap this up. To sum things up, this unit is about survival of the fittest, that organisms with the most desirable traits will be able to survive in the wild. We are talking about adaptations. Organisms with better traits will survive and reproduce to pass on that trait. These helpful mutations and helpful changes are called adaptations, and all creatures are adapted to best survive in the environments they live in, these different environments called biomes. Well, thanks for watching. That's all I have for you for today. Have a great one, and I'll see you next time.